what they would do is they would ask me a question, and they would expect that being the pastor that I would know the answer, and that I would just give them the answer. Well, I used to drive them crazy, because they would ask me a question, and instead of giving them the answer, I would ask them a question back. And, they used to get so mad, so they finally came up with that term. They said it was the grantology. And then they would come and ask me a question, and I would start to ask them back, and they would go, "Stop! No, do not ask me a question back." I learned that because I found that for me, if you just give me the answer, I forget it. But if you make me work through and find the answer, I remember it a lot better. What we're going to read today, Jesus is asked a question. And he just turns around and asks the people asking him a question. He asks them a question back. Now, Jesus does not do this for the same reason that I did. And we'll talk about that. But let's read Luke chapter 20, starting in verse 1. One day, as Jesus was teaching the people in temple courts and proclaiming the good news, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, together with the elders, came up to him. "Tell us by what authority you are doing these things," they said. "Who gave you this authority?" He replied, "I will also ask you a question. Tell me, John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin?" They discussed it among themselves and said, "If we say from heaven, he will ask, 'Why didn't you believe him?' But if we say of human origin, all the people will stone us, because they are persuaded that John was a prophet." So they answered, "We don't know where it was from." Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." The chief priests, leaders, they confront Jesus. Tells in here, Luke says that he was teaching and proclaiming, or teaching and preaching. Now, sometimes we read that and we get this idea, that we try to make everything mean something extra. And so sometimes we try to take this and go, well, okay, he was teaching and then he was preaching. And we try to make those two separate things. They're not in this passage. There may be some times where there is a difference between teaching and preaching. When Luke is saying that Jesus is teaching and proclaiming the good news, teaching and preaching, it's what's called Hebrew parallelism. It is the way that the Hebrew people spoke. And so he is basically saying, Jesus is teaching the people. He is telling them about the good news. He is telling them about the hope of God. That's it. He's not doing two separate things. Now, where is he doing this? He's probably doing this in the very place that he just cleaned out. It is probably being done in the court of the Gentiles. We talked last week about how the temple had these separate courtyards going out. And then in the very outer courtyard was called the court of the Gentiles. And that's where the only place that Gentile people could go. And in that place, that was where they were doing the money selling, changing money and the selling and buying of animals. And so it was just this circus. And Jesus goes in and he cleans that out. And he runs off the money seller. He runs off everybody. And then he begins to teach. And he comes back. And he's coming back. And that's what he's doing. He's setting up in the court of the Gentiles. This place that should have been a perfect spot for people to encounter God. But before they had not been able to because of so much craziness going on around them. But now God has cleaned, Jesus has cleaned it out. And it's suitable for people to encounter God. But the priests are upset with Jesus. Now they're upset because he's taken their prophet maker. He's hurting their prophet. And not only is he hurting their prophet on just a normal time, this is the busiest week of the year. I mean, they are leading up to Passover. This is when every able-bodied Jewish male is supposed to be in Jerusalem. They have come from all over the known world. And the high priests are looking there thinking, man, this is the week that we are going to cash in. Everybody's coming. Everybody has to offer a sacrifice. All these people coming from outside of the land of Judea, they've all got money they're going to have to exchange with us. And then Jesus goes and pushes them all out. And so they are losing their prophet maker. But even more important, What they hate is that Jesus is taking their influence away. You see, the people were supposed to look up to the chief priests. They were supposed to be highly respectful of the chief priest, of the leading people in the temple. But because of what Jesus is doing, the crowds are flocking to Jesus. It's almost as if they're saying to the priests, hey, don't worry about y'all. We're not listening to you right now. And they're going over there listening to Jesus. And the priests are terrified because they are losing their influence. Jesus is attacking them in the places that it hurts the most. And so they ask the question, who gives you this authority? You see, they believe that their authority came from Moses. And for the Jewish people, that is about as high as you can get. The only place higher is to say that it comes from God. And so they say, our authority comes from Moses. It comes from the Mosaic Law. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, where it teaches in there about what the priests were doing. So they would say that this is where our authority comes from. We have our authority based on the fact that we are the Mosaic priests. That we have that authority. Where does yours come from? Well, Jesus knows they're not asking this because they truly want to know. They're asking this question because they're trying to find some way to attack Jesus. And so they say to him, where does your authority come from? Well, he turns it because he realizes they don't want a real answer. And he responds with that question. They are insinuating that because they had not authorized Jesus, because they are the legitimate religious authority in Israel, and because they had not authorized Jesus, they are trying to say to Jesus that you don't have any authority, and really they're not even talking to Jesus. He may be the one that their words are directed to, but that's not who they're talking to. They're talking to the crowd. They're attacking, they're saying to the crowd, this guy has no authority. So they ask a question. And Jesus returns it and says, tell me, John the Baptist, where does his authority come from? Heaven or earth? Man, now the chief priests are in trouble. I would have loved to have seen this, because I could just imagine they get together, and I'm sure they're leaning over and they're talking, and they're like, okay, listen. If we say that he's not from heaven, all these people love John the Baptist. I'm sure they looked at each other and said, if we say that, we're dead. They'll kill us. But if we say that he was from heaven, meaning God, that his authority came from God, sure they looked at each other and said, this guy's smart. He's going to say, well then why didn't you listen to him? And I'm sure they went back and forth. They probably spent some time trying to figure out how they could get away with saying what they really wanted to say, which was John the Baptist was a nobody. He didn't have any real authority. That's really what they wanted to say. And I'm sure they went back and forth and they worked on it. And, I could just imagine Jesus was probably sitting over in a corner, just crossed his leg, going, what are you going to say, guys? Come on. I'm here all day. It's going to be all day about it. They kept at it. And finally, they realized there's no way out. They come back to Jesus, and they say, we don't have an answer. So Jesus says, neither will I answer you. I got to tell you, that answer is not very satisfying. Because I want Jesus to stand up in front of all the crowd and say to the entire crowd, to say to the chief priests, my authority comes from God and God alone. I don't care what you think. I want Jesus to just stand up and say, I am God's Son, I am the Messiah. It was proclaimed on Sunday. But he doesn't. He says, well, I won't tell you. And that's an unsatisfying answer. But yet, it's the perfect answer. It's the perfect answer because of this. Jesus knew what God's plan was. God's plan was not for Jesus to get arrested right then and thrown in jail and killed and crucified right then. God's plan was for Jesus to die a few days later. Because by him dying a few days later, it fits into some other patterns and some things that it needs to fit into. Jesus understood God's plan. Jesus knows what's coming. He knows that on Thursday he's going to get arrested. He knows that on Friday he is going to die. But he also knows that it's not Friday yet. It's not Thursday. It's not time for him to be arrested. And he knows that if he gives the answer that is the truth, but my authority comes from God and God alone, that he would have been arrested right then and they would have thrown him in jail. And it wouldn't have been the right time. It wouldn't have been God's plan. You and I have to ask ourselves, do we sometimes jump ahead of God's plan? Because it was tempting, I am sure, for Jesus to jump ahead of God's plan. You know, I'm sure the human part of Jesus wanted to just stop and say, no, my authority comes from God. You don't have any authority over me. But he doesn't. He says, God has a plan, and God has a time. And if I say that now, it will not fit God's plan and God's time. And there are so many times in my life that I look back and I think, I understood God's plan. I understood where God was going, where God was leading. But what I missed was God's time. That I either went too fast or went too slow. And because I missed God's time, what I did not fall perfectly into God's plan. You see, folks, we have got to understand God's plan, His will, and His time. And we need to make sure that we get those things together. And folks, in experiencing God, one of the things that we're going to be talking about is knowing and doing God's will. And in that, I think we're going to be thinking also about understanding God's time in His plan. And my challenge to every one of us is to start getting ourselves ready now. Start getting yourself ready so that as we join that study, that we are ready to hear God's plan, God's will, and to know and understand God's timing on that will. Because when we put those two things together, it ends up so much more powerful. And you know what? The staff, we have talked about since I got here. We have talked about experiencing God just like we're about to do. We have probably penciled it into the calendar. Ryan, we've probably done it 4 or 5 times. That we've penciled it into the calendar and we'd say, we're going to do it this time. And then we would start getting stuff, we start trying to work on things and we just look and go, no. And we'd erase it. And we'd come back to it. We have come back to it. Folks, I really believe that this is the right time for us as a church to unite together, to study about knowing and doing God's will. Jesus knew the time. He understood when the right time was. I really believe that it's the right time for us. Why? Because we're looking at where is God going to lead us over the next 3 to 5 years. We're looking at who is God going to bring here to lead us in our worship. There's so many things that we're stopping, that we're just kind of saying, we need to know where God is taking us. Well, experiencing God is really, I believe, going to help us. So I'm going to go back. Do you want a good, a better, or a best experience out of it? Take the best experience. Is it more time? Yes. Because if you've seen it, there are 5 days every week that you have material that you've got to go through. Yes, it's going to take your time. but it's worth it. It's going to take your time on a meeting time outside of Sunday morning to gather with a group of God's people and to talk about what you're learning throughout the week. Yes, it's going to take additional time. I know you're busy. I'm busy. But I want to encourage you to do it. Go for the best experience. Get in one of those groups. Take that challenge. Dig in. And let's follow God's plan at God's time. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to worship you. And Lord, right now, I pray for every one of us. Father, I pray for everyone in this congregation right now that has been thinking about doing experiencing God. Lord, I know that probably so many of us have come up with reasons and excuses as to why we can't commit to doing a growth group. But Father, I pray that you would just lay this challenge on our heart, that we would strive for the best experience. Lord, I believe that you are calling us to go beyond ourselves. You're calling us to step out. And so, Father, I ask that you would put that conviction in our hearts, that we would have the courage to answer. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. As we sing today, I want to just challenge you. It may be that as we sing, God is working on your heart. Maybe you want to just come and kneel and pray. Maybe you recognize there have been some times in your life where you knew what God's will was, and you jumped on it, and you started working and trying to do God's will, but you realized that you weren't doing it in God's time. And you realize that, there's some things that He called you to do that you just didn't do right. Maybe you need to confess that to Him. Or maybe it is that God has something on your heart right now that you know it's God's will for you to do. And you know that it's God's will for you to do it now. But you haven't been willing to. Give that to God today. Say to Him, I want to do your will at your time. Let's stand and sing and come with God.